Welcome back to Scripps Newsline. I'm Lauren Magarino. On this Earth Day, we're setting aside some time to remind you about a silent and deadly killer: heat. Many cities have had to face a new reality the past few summers, braving way above normal, sometimes dangerously high temperatures, even in places where most people do not have air conditioning because traditionally it didn't get so hot there.
When it becomes hot, there are very limited options for people to get out of the heat.
When I stepped outside and I noticed the humidity, I was like, wow, I feel like I'm in South Georgia.
The heat is undefeated against those who are unprepared and don't take it seriously.
This new reality is pushing cities to evolve and address the issue head on by building solutions and gathering information. And the numbers we have are pretty clear. The planet is basically guaranteed to keep getting warmer. One study by the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science is revealing each city's climate change twin. And the idea is straightforward. Whatever city or town you live in now, its weather a few decades down the road will resemble another city's current weather. So, for example, Philadelphia's weather in 2080 will be just like the weather historically in Memphis. Memphis, meanwhile, will have weather that looks more like the current weather patterns in College Station, Texas. And as you might expect, most places are set to move southward. There are several versions of the model, but most areas east of the Mississippi River move hundreds of miles southwest. Parts of the upper Midwest and Great Lakes move southeast. And in the western half of the U.S., most cities move a good bit south. And some big city examples: New York's future comparison is the current weather in Jonesboro, Arkansas. Chicago will feel more like Kansas City. San Francisco will feel more like Los Angeles. And places like Los Angeles and Miami will have weather you can currently find in Mexico. Now, 2080 may sound far off, but our young children today will not even be at retirement age at that point. Matthew Fitzpatrick is the co-author of this study and a professor at the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science. Thank you for joining us tonight. And in your research, I'm curious, which city's top three struck you as profoundly different 60 years from now?
Well, I think like a lot of people, the cities that were most surprising to me were the ones that I knew the best and I had lived in or grown up in. So that would have been places like Baltimore, Maryland, and York, Pennsylvania. Because even for me, it was shocking to see the scale of these changes. You know, we hear about climate change couched in numbers like degrees Fahrenheit and percent changes in precipitation and that sort of thing. But to put it on a map and see that, you know, Baltimore is going to become like the Deep South really hit home for me.
Yeah, and to your point about, you know, we're used to hearing the temperatures and a bit about precipitation. This map told us about precipitation as well, and that kind of stood out to me. I'm curious, why include it as part of this map and how it, you know, operates?
Well, we wanted to move just beyond temperatures and try to give people a more complete look at climate. You know, precipitation patterns, just like temperature, often defines places, you know, how much snowfall you get in winter or whether your summers are really dry. And so we wanted to have that broader look at climate to give people a sense of just not how, you know, warm it's going to get, but also whether, you know, our summer's going to be really dry, or they're going to suffer through droughts, is there going to be snow in the winter, and those sorts of things.
That's such a good point, especially as we've seen snowfall levels really decrease. We've reported that out with our meteorologist, Scott Withers, you know, going to New York, going to Chicago, and not seeing that same level of snow we used to. I know that you also mapped out how cities would feel if we did bring down emissions. How much of an effect does that have on our climate as we know it?
You know, I think the rough number would be it cuts the impacts by half if you want to couch it that way. So in terms of, you know, going back to the high emissions scenarios, we found that you'd need to drive over 500 miles to the south on average to find your climate twin. If we reduce emissions, you know, we can cut that into half. We get closer to about 300 miles, and we go from about 8 degrees Fahrenheit or more of expected warming and cut that down to about 4 or 5. And that's not even, you know, what we'd expect from the Paris Climate Accord that would have even greater benefit. So that was kind of a midline reduction, which isn't as far as we need to get, but it's probably more realistic.
Yeah. What was the timeline that you worked off of for that as far as if we did cut down emissions? How long were you basing that off of?
So we were looking at end of century. So we were using the end period, basically the average around 2080 or so. So, we're looking about 60 years into the future.
So how could or should this affect maybe city planning going forward?
Yeah, I mean, that's a question that we get a lot about this. And it was something we highlighted to some extent in the paper. There's good reasons that, these analyses can give a general perspective on what cities might expect, because infrastructure is often built around the prevailing climate of a location. But one thing we didn't include, and that's really important for infrastructure, are extreme events. So, a lot of infrastructure is built to try to hold, what might be a flooding event or that sort of thing. But as we know, extreme events are not just increasing in frequency, but also severity. So cities are going to really be dealing with entirely new situations that there might not be good models for to look to for how to deal with those.
So you're saying our understanding of our climate as we know it, would be something completely different that we don't have understanding about?
Well, I guess what I'm saying to clarify is that extreme events are really hard to predict, and they're becoming more severe and more frequent. And so there's few places that have had to deal with events of that severity and that frequency. So we don't really have other places we can look to say, well, how are they dealing with it in these places? Because there are a few places that have done so thus far.
Young adults might see this and think about moving somewhere that could get milder, this, affecting where people go. How do you see this pattern driving migration?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a common response that people are having now because, we see the devastation that's happening in places around the world. California is a good example in the U.S. And people are wondering whether they want to keep tolerating the extreme heat or the droughts or the flooding or the fires or what have you. So, yeah, I mean, people might look to these maps and try to find places that retain the climates that they prefer or they feel are most resilient in the future.
Have you heard anything from, maybe city leaders or state government, all the way up to federal legislators, responding perhaps to your paper and this mapping tool?
I've definitely gotten some emails from people that work in city planning, and in particular, the individuals in cities that are in charge of which trees get planted on the streets, because the trees that are living in some cities now may not be able to live there in the future because of increases in temperature. So, yeah, I have heard from individuals like that looking for advice and how they might use this information.
I wouldn't even have thought about that, about the trees that you plant. Can that withstand this evolving climate? What else has come up as part of needing a conversation, basically, as a result of this changing temperature and precipitation?
Well, I think the biggest thing is the communication angle. We hear a lot about a 2 degrees Celsius or what have you limit that we're trying to stay within in terms of climate change. But actually translating that into something that people can relate to is difficult. There's lots of friends and family members that I've shown these results to, and for the first time ever, they've had a response like, wow, I had no idea this is what we're looking at. Again, to this, this was published 5 years ago. And what amazes me is the amount of change that we've seen in just the last 5 years, very much in line with expectations that we've been concerned about for a long time. So, that's also been a pretty big reaction from people.
Well, Matthew Fitzpatrick, thank you so much for joining us and sharing this tool, this information. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Up next, looking at this on a local level, the mayor of Salt Lake City, Utah, joins us to unpack her city's climate future as the Great Salt Lake dwindles and air quality worsens. Her green initiatives in motion to try and reverse the issue is next.